Howdy-ho. Andrew, aka Kelpier here. Welcome to the Onion Buns and welcome to another trip down memory lane of an MMORPG. So today we're going to talk about Star Wars Galaxy, otherwise known as SWG. But before we get to that, if you're wondering why I've skipped the obvious one, EverQuest, because the last one I did was Ultima Online and now I'm doing SWG. I'm saving my top 5 MMORPGs to the very end of this video series. And EverQuest is in the top 5, as is, well, the top 5 I can tell you right now are going to be EverQuest, Dark Age of Camelot, Elder Scrolls Online, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, or Star Wars The Old Republic, I should say, and Neverwinter Nights on AOL. Those are my top 5 MMORPGs. So I'm going to cover all of the MMORPGs I played and beta tested and alpha tested prior, and then the final 5 will be those 5 MMORPGs. So that's why we're skipping EverQuest. So anyway, so that gets us to Star Wars Galaxy, SWG. I got a lot of fond memories of this game, and I got a lot of frustration with this game. So I didn't get to beta test this game. I was invited. I got invited and all that, but my computer couldn't handle it at the time. So I started playing, I want to say it was probably about 4 or 5 months after the game actually went to retail. I had bought a new computer and it, met all the stuff you need. And so I didn't get to beta test this game. So I went in cold in the retail. The guild I ran, some of them did beta test it and they set up a chapter in SWG. And so when I joined in, we already had a thriving city built and, everything you could think of, guild hall and town hall and mayor and shuttle port and everything. So it was, I came into a very finished guild set. Unfortunately, the game wasn't finished. Far from it, as we'll learn over the years. But my initial reaction is I was blown away. This was just fantastic. Like I said, I came in and had, I think the guild had about 40 members playing SWG, and each one had a house. Then we had a guild hall, and one of the members got elected mayor. And SWG at launch had some amazing concepts and ideas. And then sadly, they just got all washed away by Sony. And it was really shame because what they had at the start was really interesting. It was really creative. So at the start, you built your little town, like everybody built their own, and they played and they leveled and they got money and blah, blah, blah. And then they bought a house. And when you put down the city hall, it designated an area for your city, town, and then it grew into a city and blah, blah, blah. And you would build inside there, but you had, it was like real life. You had to pay taxes to the city and, so some people would build outside of it because they didn't want to pay the taxes. And, and when I learned about all this, my imagination just went, I was thinking we were going to be able to hire NPC guards to patrol the city streets, and we had a working shuttle port, which increased the income to the city because when the game launched, you walked on foot or you took shuttles, and this made the universe that SWG was in feel so massive. We are talking so massive because there was no fast travel other than a shuttle. So you'd pick your destination, and shuttles went on planet. You had to go to the spaceport and take a spaceship to go to a different planet. So on the planet, you would go to the spaceport or whatever, and you would pick your shuttle location to an established shuttle port. And you would pay, and part of that would go to the shuttle port you're going to the city. And this is how the cities would fund themselves so that they could keep expanding and growing and building. Fortunately, when they came out with speeders, which everyone was was demanding. And I mean, nothing's changed nowadays. Look at Starfield. They launched without speeders or without, the Doom buggy or whatever it is. And everyone was screaming for it. But Starfield as well, like the planets just felt so freaking massive because you were walking everywhere. You could fly up into space and then drop your ship down at different locations and walk around the ship, was what I actually did before the Doom buggy or whatever. But yeah, they just felt massive. And that was the same for SWG, is the planets felt massively huge, because to walk across a planet would literally take you days in real life. Like, it wasn't days in game time. It was going to take you 48 hours to walk across a planet, and that's just straight across. Then you got, the radius. So these felt so huge. But when they brought out the speeders, suddenly everyone got a speeder and they just drove everywhere, and the shuttles became basically non-existent. And like on the town we had, when I started, there was probably about 50 to 60 people taking shuttles every single day. When the speeders came out, within a month, that was down to 1 or 2 people a day. And within another month, it was empty and it was meaningless. And this is how Sony continued to sabotage their own game. Now, I understand a lot of people wanted speeders, and I mean, when they came out, I used them. I don't think I ever rode a shuttle again. Well, maybe that one planet that had the crate dragons, because I seem to remember going to the spaceport, taking a shuttle to a town that it was smart. That town had been smart. They had built right by the crate dragon graveyard. And that's where you went and fought the crate dragon. So I think I rode a shuttle to that town. But other than that, I don't recall riding a shuttle again once speeders came out. So it was, like I said, Sony was sabotaging their own game from day one. And that was a real shame. It's like the droid engineering skill. I mean, when I started, that was one of the first skills I wanted. I wanted to build droids. And again, my imagination was, we will guard the town with droids. I'll build droids, and then we'll program the droids to do a march or a path around the town, guarding the town. Well, that never got added to the game. So what you had was these droids that single droid follow you, and they were multi-purpose. You had combat or you had medical or whatever, but that's all they were. It's like, it was such a missed opportunity in my mind. So yeah, that was my very initial impression of SWG. Was this game, it had so much potential to it, and it did so many things really creatively well at the start, and then Sony just kept sabotaging themselves over and over and over. I think it went through like 5 or 6 different remakes that drastically changed how the game worked each time. So, you had spent hundreds of hours building your character and doing this and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden it's been changed. And now you're like, okay, now I have to redo all this, regrind all this, joy, and then by the end, they scrapped the entire skill system and went with classes. So you're like, the hell? That's what kills SWG. Everybody has a billion theories on what killed SWG. In my opinion, what killed SWG was Sony. They could not just accept their original vision and work from that. They kept trying to change it to grab the newest fad in a game, and it just drove players away. One thing I want to mention before we go any further is I understand there a lot of people out there like to call SWG EverQuest in space, including when I was playing it, they would did. It never was. It never was, people. SWG was heavily influenced by one game, Ultima Online. And SWG was honestly the natural progression of Ultima Online. You built your houses, you decorated your houses. You couldn't do that in EverQuest. That didn't exist in EverQuest. That was something from Ultima Online. You had a player-driven economy. Again, EverQuest had a little bit of that, but for the most part, it wasn't there. That was Ultima Online. You had open world PvP and PKing, again, that was Ultima Online. That was not EverQuest. EverQuest from day one had PvP and non-PvP zones. And, you know, if you went into the PvP areas, it was consensual. Most of the zones were non-PvP. So unless you agreed to dueling, you didn't have to worry about being attacked by other players. In SWG, just like in Ultima Online, once you're outside the cities, it was a wild frontier and you had to worry about it. So yeah, let's just dismiss this false premise that SWG was EverQuest in space. It wasn't. SWG was and always was Ultima Online, the next progression of Ultima Online. And that's not a bad thing. Like the decorating of the houses was identical to Ultima Online. You know, like if you've watched some of my other videos, I did one video on the housing of UO, and I explained how they designed things, like building a fish tank. You would layer dyed linen, and you know, and SWG, that's exactly how they did it. Now the other problem with SWG, and they did get this from Ultima Online, and it had the exact same detrimental problem, is the SWG engine drew every single item. Even if you couldn't see the item, you're standing next to a house. Well, it's drawing every single item in that house, even though you can't see into the house, which increased the lag tremendously. And lag was always the biggest issue in SWG, just like it was in Ultima Online. So that was the history of SWG. It was Ultima Online in space. It was Ultima Online with a Star Wars ship, in effect. But it was a good game. It was. Like, the resource gathering, I never really got into it because, well, I was working 16 hours a day at this time in my life. So, you know, I needed a game that was more of a casual pastime than something to sink in 12, 14 hours a day into. And with the resource gathering, especially the mining, you would have to survey, and then you'd have to set up your mining equipment, and they would pull out the resources, and different areas had different quality of return resources. So it wasn't just, you weren't just mining ore. The ore had a percentage quality, and the cheaper the ore, the less it was worth, and the less useful it was in crafting. And so you'd have to scan constantly. And then every week, you'd have to rescan, because even if you found a gold mine spot the week before, the next week, it's re-randomized, and you may have an absolutely dead spot. So you'd have to lift up your harvesters, rescan, find a new spot, put the harvester down, and set that up for the week. So it was I don't even want to say it was a game inside a game. It was a commitment inside the game. And then the crafting itself was, oh my God, it was very detailed. Like you had, again, I really didn't mess with it. I didn't really have the time for it, but you would take those ore and you'd have to build a manufacturing plant, and you'd have to get the schematics, and there was a whole bunch. It wasn't just sitting down with your materials and going, this is what I want to build. Like there was a lot to it. And then what the quality of the materials you were using determined how the quality of the product you were making, you know, and this is how you got housing as well. So you could also buy the schematics for housing and just play some, which is how I ended up doing it. But other people, like they designed their houses and everything. So SWG was ahead of its time. It really was in a lot of aspects. But unfortunately, it was run by a really horrible company that just couldn't get out of their own way. You know, if they had just kept the original design and just growing from it, because the game was active originally. The community was really active. It was the changes Sony kept making, kept driving players away and driving them away and driving them away and one of the biggest, and people will argue with me on this one, but one of the biggest mistakes I felt Sony made was, this is a Star Wars game, yet when the game launched, you couldn't be a Jedi. You couldn't. They did bring in the when I was playing, it was holograms. So you would find a hologram and it would tell you your quest, and then you'd have to go out and do the quest if you could. These were not easy quests, and you would have to do 8 or 9 of them. I don't remember exactly now, but it was like 8 or 9 of them. And once you finished all of them and you combine them, then you could become a Jedi. Well, very, very, very few people ever got to that point. I think I only ever got 5 of the holograms done before I was like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing here. But the problem with being a Jedi in the early parts of the game was if you died, it was permadeath. Your character died. So why would you work that hard to become a Jedi only to have permadeath? And then on top of that, they put out the bounty hunters. Well, these bounty hunters they were just a class basically. And they'd look at the bounty hunter terminal and go, okay, there's a Jedi at this sector. And then 9 or 10 of them would go out there and kill the Jedi, and then permadeath, and the Jedi's gone. So people didn't, even when they got their Jedi early on, they didn't want to play them because you don't want permadeath on your characters, especially one that's that hard to get. You know, it might have been different if the characters you killed as a Jedi also suffered permadeath, but they didn't. So it was very one-sided, and I heard a lot of complaints from the Jedis, the people that did make Jedi. They said, no, I don't want to play that character because just some horde of Lobi bounty hunters are going to come out and swarm me and I'll die and then I've lost my character. So they only played them in very strict scenarios, which basically eliminated them from the game. Again, this is a Star Wars game. What is Star Wars? Star Wars is Jedi, Sith, predominantly. Now, yes, you have all the other classes, but Jedi and Sith are what draw people to Star Wars. So it was a very flawed concept right from the beginning, and then it got changed, and it got changed, and it got changed, and it got changed. And eventually they just, at the very end, they just allowed you to roll up a Jedi, and you leveled it up like a normal class, but it was so watered down as a Jedi, you know, as... The early Jedis were great because they were powerful, but that permadeath was just such a stupid design. You know, again, Sony couldn't get out of their own way. The other problem I had with SWG is it had no story, which is exactly what Ultima Online was. It was the very definition of open world, and it had no story. It had missions. It didn't have quests. Like, it was like, if anyone out there's played Starfield, mission terminals. You go to you grab it. Oh, you got to take this many ore to this planet. There's your mission. Got to go kill this NPC. There's your mission, you know. But there was no backstory. There was no characters. There was not. It was just mission terminals. That's where you got everything. And, you know, even playing, it got boring. It got really boring because... You know, I've said it before, you need story. In an RPG, be it a single-player RPG or an MMORPG, you need story. You need characters that draw you into that story. And SWG didn't have that. SWG was completely driven by its community. So as the community numbers started dipping, the game started dipping. And that's ultimately what killed the game is, you know, it was a game designed to succeed when it had thousands and thousands and thousands of players online. But once they were into hundreds or less, it wasn't a particularly fun game. Like it was designed as a solo game in many ways, but utilizing the community. Like, for instance, you would go to the local cantina and listen to the band and get a buff, an entertainer's buff. You'd go talk to the local doctor, and usually you'd pay the doctor, and he would buff you for like 2 hours with his buffs, and so on and so on. And you'd get that, and then you'd go out adventuring. But if you didn't have those buffs and you tried to go adventuring, it was not advisable. It was not advisable at all. It was really freaking hard. And yeah, but the adventuring itself was really very solo. So it really wasn't designed to be a group game. It was designed to be a community game. And the community is where it had its strongest appeal. the game itself, it really wasn't that good. But the additional stuff, like the decorating, like the guilds building cities together, and then you would have I joined a PvP guild because they would fight with another PvP guild attacking each other's cities. So it was like at least you're creating a group content that way. But it just, yeah, they missed out on the RPG part of it. They were an MMO, but they missed out on the RPG part of it. And I always felt that was a big mistake by them. And I haven't played the restoration or anything, and I wonder if they've fixed that with the restoration, the free servers and that, because the original game, I had a lot of fun for a lot of hours, but it's not in my top 5 because nothing really stood out about it other than the concept of it. Hey, one of my favorite things to do, I hate the frickin' Ewoks and the Gungans, okay? I despise them. So in SWG, I would take my character and I'd take the spaceport and I'd go over to Ewok planet, Endor, and I would just start slaughtering Ewoks. This was very therapeutic to me. I'd just wander into their little tribal cities, and I would just start mass slaughtering Ewoks. I got no loot for it. This was the other thing, is like what you got from killing stuff was it was so minor and tedious, and the rewards were not there. This game was designed to be player community, where crafting was everything, which is ironic because when I got to SWTOR, crafting became nothing, and I found myself wishing for SWG. I think both games needed to find that comfortable middle rather than going to the extreme on either end. So that was, and then they went through the different builds. They all are now. I could look them up, but they're meaningless. The one that stood out to me was the village. The village was one of the attempts to redo the Jedi, make them more achievable, and it was a solid concept. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was a solid concept. The problem is they were trying to force grouping. And grouping by itself is not a bad thing. But you're trying to become a Jedi. You're going to this village. You're getting the quest. You're grouping together so that you can do the quest. And then you're out like with 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 people. And you finish the quest and only one person gets credit for it. And then, as is predictable, the next time the quest comes up, you go there. Well, this guy already got it, so he's not interested in helping you anymore. It was a very predictable problem that the village had. And sure enough, that's what happened is, you have these group-orientated quests, but you can't get a group anymore because once people get their agenda, they don't want to redo it. The solution would have been to give the whole group credit for completing the quest. I mean, that was the obvious solution, but that's not what they did. And again, Sony couldn't get out of their own way. They just had to make everything so grindy. And I'm not against grinding. I'm really not. But even I was frustrated because, I'm trying to build up this character. I'm trying to get the Jedi quests done. I'm trying to get the skills I want for my Jedi. And now I can't do it because those people that were doing it, they all got their credit already. And yeah, they didn't want to help. So it was a very flawed, it was a brilliant concept. Like I still, to this day, I think the village was a brilliant concept done very poorly. And yeah, so that, and I think I got about 75% of the way to my Jedi on that. And then it's like, I couldn't do anything else. Again, frustration. So, I couldn't get the holocrons done. I couldn't get the village done. I was very frustrated because I played for a few years trying to get the Jedi and never could until they changed it to a class base. But that Jedi was so watered down. It was just like, you're better off being a swordsman than you were a Jedi anyway as a class. So they were on the right approach with the Jedi. Make them special. And to make them special, don't make them easy. Don't make it something everybody can do. But don't make it so hard that nobody can do. And again, Sony went to the extreme. And yeah, that was just another failed attempt. So they did have one thing that I loved, and I thought this would get used in SWTOR, and it never was. But in SWG, the Empires, they would land a shuttle. And this is why I wanted roving guards in our city, is they would land a shuttle and out would come like 20 stormtroopers and they would attack your player's city because you were over to the rebellion or whatever. So, and this would happen on the Imperial cities, is the rebellion would land and attack them. Very early precursor to what Rift did in later years with their rifts. And I thought it was a fantastic idea. And like I said, I always wanted to build droid guards and hire guards, town guards, to patrol our cities so that when these came, we would get notified, because that was the problem, is you didn't always know they came unless you saw them landing. So get notified and would fight them and hold them off because they could do big damage to your town. So, if you paid for the guards, it would be a way to build your town up, make your people feel safer. Unfortunately, Sony never did that, never saw that. So that didn't come to be. And like I said, I was thinking in SWTOR they would do the same thing, especially as SWTOR was so heavy into Jedi versus Sith and Empire versus Rebellion, that I thought they would utilize this, especially on Ilum for the PvP planet. But they never did. I always thought that was a mistake too. Anyway, so like I said, there was tons of positives about SWG, but you had to realize that SWG was an MMO. It was not an MMORPG. It was an MMO. That's a multiplayer online game. Community was everything. And that, it was a solid game with a really bad company is ultimately what it came down to, and they kept chasing the quick fix rather than thinking it out. And every quick fix seemed to hurt them more and more and more until eventually it just shut down. And now you got the free servers and restoration and that. And I've never tried them, but I should try them because, again, SWG had a lot of good stuff about it. And maybe with creative people rather than Sony, those free servers could expand on that. I don't know. The one smart thing that SWG did, though, and they learned from Ultima on this, because I've talked about this, is Ultima had such a small land base. So it got covered in houses. And then they mirrored the continent, and that got covered in houses. So you had no open areas to adventure. It was all urban sprawl. Well, SWG learned from that. So the planets were huge, and there was a lot of planets. So there was no way for all of these planets to get covered in urban sprawl. Some of them did, like one of the starter planets. It became basically Coruscant. It was all houses. So there was no places the only adventuring you're going to have on that planet is when the Imperials or the Republic drop a shuttle down. Like, all the adventuring area was gobbled up by urban sprawl. But you could still go to Dantooine, you could still go to Endor, you could still go to a dozen other planets, and the urban sprawl was not as severe. So you could find areas to adventure in. And that was smart on their part. For the style of housing they were doing, that was smart that they had enough planets to support it. And if they had been smart, they would have brought out even more planets in every expansion or update or whatever to ensure that the urban sprawl never overtook all of the adventuring areas. But yeah. So anyway, that's my reminiscence of SWG. Oh, the one thing I didn't touch on is Jump to Lightspeed. They came out with the space. Now, I'm not a space jockey guy, so I didn't mess around too much with it, but it was popular. It drew people back in, and it was popular. I don't think it would be as popular nowadays because it was very late 90s, early 2000 style of flight sim. And I do remember it being very hard to navigate up there. But yeah, Jump to Lightspeed was a big success for them. And they should have built on that too, but You know, that's like I said this whole video. SWG was a creative, community-based game with a terrible publisher. What are you going to do? So anyway, that's my video for today. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, a subscribe, and a share. I'm trying to grow my channel, and a like, a subscribe, and a share does me wonders, and I do appreciate it. It takes 1 second to subscribe, costs you absolutely nothing, helps me immensely. Just hit the subscribe button on the bottom of the screen. Always feel free to leave a comment. Please come in and tell me your stories of SWG. What did you like about it? What did you hate about it? What do you remember about it? Like, I have lots of memories, and I do weekly stories on, the different games I've played. But yeah, come in, tell me your stories. Tell me what you think of it. What do you remember? What are your bright spots about it? What are your negatives about it? I'd love to hear it. Also, leaving a comment really does help me with the YouTube algorithm and getting more eyes on my videos. And as always, pew, 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 and shit. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.